History teaches us that factions will put an end to freedom. So what's the problem with factions? James Madison, the father of the Constitution, called factions the mortal disease of popular government. Is this the fate awaiting the United States? I'm Joseph Loconte, an author and historian. I want to understand why most governments collapse into social chaos, tyranny, disorder, or worse, and why others manage to preserve freedom over the long haul. So aside from floating along happily in one of their famed gondolas, what am I doing here in Venice? I'm here because for over 1,000 years, throughout the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, Venice distinguished itself as a stable republic. Yes, 500 years before the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia in 1787, a democratic revolution occurred here. In Venezia.
E tu vuoi riservare quello per sempre.
Oh, he's asking if we would like to sit down and have a little drink, a little coffee right now.
Some coffee do you want?
Do I have a time? Our friend and guide on this journey, Gasparo Contarini, he was an important politician in the Venetian Republic. He was one of the first to write about it. Contarini said that the Venetians were determined to prevent their republic from being destroyed by the monster of factions. So, how did they do it? In their early days, the Venetians had their problems and their power struggles. John Adams, who studied the history of the Republic, he said he saw scenes of tyranny, revolt, and cruelty which excite horror. Well, does any of that sound familiar? Well, out of all this mayhem, the Venetians learned something about human nature and the nature of political power. They learned you couldn't concentrate power in a single individual or institution because that was a one-way ticket to tyranny. They took a cue from that Greek philosopher Aristotle. They created separate and distinct sources of political authority, what Aristotle called a mixed constitution. Executive power was given to the Doge, who functioned almost like a king. His palace, the Palazzo Ducale, was the physical powerhouse of government.
The Doge's palace is where we are in Venice. And it is beyond impressive.
But the Doge had to answer to the Senate, the city's aristocrats, and they set the legislative agenda for the Republic, and they openly debated all of the issues facing the Republic. So now we are in the Senate chamber. I've been in the U.S. Senate in Washington, D.C., and it's got some impressive rooms, but nothing like this. By the way, there were rules of debate. No personal insults. No talking trash against your opponents. It was considered bad form. Political civility. What a concept! Both of these institutions, the monarchy and the Senate, they were held in check by the Great Council. The Council was the sovereign assembly of Venice. It was a republican body in that it was open to all of the aristocrats over the age of 25. It was the Council that elected the Doge and the members of the Senate, and all of its members had equal voting power. One man, one vote. By 1500, the Venetian Republic is the most representative political body in the world. But this doesn't explain the success of the Venetian Republic. I once met that great Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia, and he was asked to explain the strength and longevity of the American Republic. Scalia gave a three-word answer: separation of powers. This is what Aristotle envisioned for a political society: a constitution that thwarted despotism by combining the elements of monarchy, aristocracy, and democracy. They have the Doge, which represents the monarchy. They have the Senate, made up of the aristocrats. And they have the Great Council with its democratic character. None of them possesses absolute power, and each is held in check by the other. This is what our friend Signore Contarini described. With this balance of government, our republic has been able to achieve what none of the ancients did. He wasn't exaggerating. Greek democracy imploded. The Roman Republic, it degenerated into a brutal and corrupt empire. Venice outlasted them all. As my friend John Adams put it, great care is taken in Venice to balance one court against another and to render their powers mutual checks to each other. This is how you prevent the abuse of political power. It's the abuse of power that leads to factions and political violence. It's when people believe that there's no such thing as equal justice under the law that they take the law into their own hands. Remember the famous line from Lord Acton? Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. The American founders took this truth to heart as they hammered out a constitution in Philadelphia in 1787. If men were angels, they said, no government would be necessary. They knew that men and women were not angels. They wanted a constitution that would endure. And Venice was on their top 10 list. The Americans produced a constitution based on limited government and checks and balances, designed to protect individual rights and freedoms. Without a constitution like this, there is no way you can prevent the abuse of power. And the will to power, this is a raw fact about the human condition. The failure to take this fact into consideration, to take it seriously, probably accounts for more than half the horrors of history, especially those of the 20th century. And you don't have to be a history geek like me to see it. Fascist Italy, Nazi Germany, the Communist Soviet Union, Imperial Japan, they each invested all political power in a single political party led by a single omnipotent dictator, the totalitarian state. The only thing that stood in their way was an idea, the concept of the God-given freedom and equality of every human soul. It was this idea, an idea found in the Bible, that inspired and guided the American founders at Philadelphia. And it was this form of government in the West, Republican government, that defeated the totalitarian states during the Second World War.
Hitler knows that he will have to break us in this island or lose the war. If we can stand up to him, all Europe may be freed. But if we fail, then the whole world, including the United States, including all that we have known and cared for, will sink into the abyss of a new dark age. Let us therefore brace ourselves to our duty, so bear ourselves that if the British Empire and its commonwealths last for 1,000 years, men will still say, this was their finest hour.
We're getting ready to mark the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And that is going to be a moment of cultural crisis in this country if we don't kind of rethink the foundations of our own republic. What's the state of the Union? That's really the question to ask ourselves. Listen to Contarini. We should fear nothing so much as an internal enemy and hostility between citizens. Not so much a foreign power, but what's happening inside this country. Look, we've been talking about how factions are the great enemy of self-government, of a democratic republic. Factions, tribalism, this is poison. So what's the antidote? One of them, and maybe the most important, is empathy. Empathy can be a kind of inoculation against the tendency to move into the tribalistic mode. Look, we know America has its problems, but let me tell you what I love about this country. And it goes back to a line from Abraham Lincoln. He described the United States as the last best hope of earth. Why? Because here, like nowhere else, we've built this republic based on what? On the rights and the dignity of the individual. It has produced the most productive, the freest, the most creative society in the history of the world. That is worth defending. In Philadelphia in 1787, as the founders are concluding the Constitutional Convention, Franklin emerges from Independence Hall and he's stopped by somebody in the crowd. And a person asks him, Dr. Franklin, what do we have? And Franklin's answer is a mixture of realism and hope. Franklin says, a republic, if you can keep it. We can't possibly preserve our republic if we're ignorant of its founding principles. We cannot maintain our freedom if we don't understand the historic threats to freedom. So, what will it be? Order or chaos? Liberty or tyranny? A shining city on a hill or a shipwreck of shattered dreams? The choice is in our hands.
Tutto, everything.
Yes, beautiful.